Dialing in here. We're really excited to welcome you tonight to talk about how college admissions officers read applications. And we have a real one right here. This is Alison Marlborough. She's one of my colleagues at Signet Education, and she spent 12 years in a very selective college admissions office and can take us through kind of her experience there and what it was actually like to read applications, how she made sense of different parts of the applications, what her particular college seemed to care most about, her own reading style, what she liked to hear about from students. And then we want to turn, of course, all of this information into some practical advice for the parents and advisors in the audience of, well, how do we translate this into mentoring students as they go through this process? So with that, I think we have kind of a quorum here. We'll just dive in. Allison, do you know how to turn off the waiting room? You could just do that.
I believe I did that already.
Oh, great. All right, then we don't need to worry about that anymore. Great. Well, I am Sheila, Signet's president and COO. Signet's a full-service educational consulting firm. We do tutoring, test prep, college admissions, and executive function coaching for teenagers, typically 8th grade and up, and we work with a lot of college students as well. And tonight we are joined by my senior admissions consultant, Alison, who, as I mentioned, spent 12 years in admissions at WashU, St. Louis, and then worked for 7 years as the college counselor in an independent school. She now works one-on-one with Signet students, helping them through all aspects of this process. And tonight she's going to share a little bit of her insight and wisdom with you. I'll be here to kind of monitor the chat and facilitate things, but really Allison is the one with the knowledge that it's going to lead us through this presentation. And then I'll come back at the end to kind of close us out. But with that, I will turn it over to Allison.
Wonderful. Well, thank you everyone for being with us here and putting up with any technological challenges, but it seems like we've got this going. I feel very proud of us, Sheila. So we'll call that a win for tonight with the live stream. So thank you again for sharing a little bit of your valuable time with us to, talk a bit about how college admissions officers actually read applications. I think when I'm working with the students that I advise with Signet, I spend a lot of time obviously helping them, craft what's going into the application. But sometimes we have to pause and take a step back and figure out how the admissions office is actually absorbing this information. Is there something going on weird with the screen here? We're better. Okay, thumbs up. Maybe it was just on my end, no problem. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We're going to go through this presentation. Hopefully I can limit myself to about like 40 minutes of actual presenting. And then I want to make sure that we have questions, plenty of time for questions at the end. So let me see if I can fully execute my screen share mode here. All right, hang on just 1 second. Make sure I'm in a slideshow presentation. All right, and share. Okay, we should be in good shape. So how do college admissions officers read your application? Hopefully it'll let me advance my slide. There we go. Whoop. So the first thing to think about is, who are these people? Who are these college admissions officers who are actually taking in the applications that you have so carefully prepared? The first thing to point out is that they are people. They are real people. This is not a process done by computer. If it was, it would be a whole lot faster, and I would argue not done as well. Universities pay college admissions officers to recruit students, but also to really take the time to carefully read these applications. Typically, I ask students, okay, who do you think your audience is for reading these applications? you really don't know. You'll see generally two types of college admissions officers. You will see career admissions officers. So these are people who've been in the business potentially for a decade or more, have maybe worked at multiple undergraduate institutions. And then you also have recent college graduates. My own story is that I started as that recent college graduate when I was first hired by the admissions office at Washington University in St. Louis. So I started reading applications as a fresh 22-year-old, who had just graduated from college and was ready to enter the workforce. And the longer I stayed in admissions, I think I transitioned to becoming one of those career admissions officers, more or less. I guess I'm showing my age. But I was there for 12 years. And so that really brought me to the point where I was not only reading applications, which I certainly was, but also second reading applications, running committees, things like that. So when a prospective student is creating an application, we try to think about who the audience is. But we also have to know that there is a diversity in that audience. It's not going to be all young 20-somethings, and it's not going to be just older professionals. You're going to see a wide range there. But the one thing that they all know is that they all know their school. They know the college that they're working for, and they know what makes their school special. They know the qualities of students who really thrive on their campus. So that leads them in their reading process to be really concerned about the fit. So this information in the student's application, how does that fit with our campus? How does that fit with our special community that we want to cultivate on our campus? Often in our admissions committees, we would ask ourselves, yes, the student has an amazing resume and has wonderful academic preparation, but is the student going to be a good roommate? Are they going to be a good teammate? Are they going to be a good classmate? Those are the things that we really, dig more deeply into as we were making our decisions. All right. So what is it like to read an application? Again, to show my age, when I first started reading applications, we were reading on paper. We had physical paper files, we had pens, we had note-taking sheets. Now, and at the end of my career, applications are read digitally. So that typically means you have two computer monitors. One is set up with the student's information, and the other one is set up basically with like a note sheet. So the reader is inputting information, takeaways from the student's application into some type of note-taking form that is customized to each college. So depending on what they're looking for, what information they find valuable in the application, that's where the note sheet comes in handy. And I actually love this infographic because that really is what it looks like. One set up portrait style, one set up landscape style, going through the PDF copies of what the students submitted as their application. Most applications are somewhere in the neighborhood of like 12 to 14 PDF pages that they're scrolling through on one side, reading and typing notes on the other. A single admissions officer can read over 1,000 applications per admission cycle. The reading season typically starts, in mid-October, and certainly in some cases extends into February, March, depending on the process and how quickly they're turning over their applications and the application deadlines that university has. Keep in mind that most applications are read more than once by multiple people. Some admissions offices are even doing community-based reading, where they may have a group of 4 or 5 admissions officers in the room, all looking at one application at a time. So there are, multiple passes on applications, but in terms of first reading, the first pass at an application, that admissions officer may be reading 40, 50, even 60 applications in a single day. And that's a long day, but that's what they're trained and paid to do. So knowing what you know now, what does this mean for your application? How can you hope to stand out when flawed, real, overworked people are in charge of making these decisions? Because as I've said to my students, you don't know if your application is going to be the first one that admissions officer reads that morning when they've just had their coffee, or you don't know if they're going to be reading it at 11 p.m. over, a bowl of Cheerios as they're trying to get through the applications that they're reading that day. You have no control over that. But what you can do is think about how you can make your application stand out in this process. So number one, put yourself in the admissions officer's shoes. This often means, recognizing they are people. We want to make their job easier. So sometimes, that means don't submit unnecessary or unrequested documents. There would be times when we would have applications, that would just be so long. And it's like, what is in here? What am I looking at? We don't recommend sending, every single, award that student has received since 5th grade. It's great that you got a gold star on your piano recital when you were 10 years old, but that's not what the application is for. That's not what the university is looking for. And at some point, you're going to start to annoy them by just including extraneous information that wasn't requested. A good rule of thumb is universities want what they ask for. And if they didn't ask for it, then they really don't want it. So it's important while you are trying to highlight all of your achievements, you don't want to pester them or bother them with a lot of extra documents that truthfully they don't want and aren't really going to consider favorably anyway. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, be genuine and strategic. We're going to break these down as to what this means. First of all, be genuine. The college application process is a time for self-reflection. It's one of the most important pieces that I think students sometimes want to skip over in their rush, maybe to fill out another application or to, just get going to beat a deadline. The self-reflection piece is actually one of the most important, and it really can shine through in your application. I read applications. A lot of what I read was students from New York City, the 5 boroughs of New York City, also some other areas of the country, but that was mostly my first read territory. You could tell when a student was being genuine, when they really were communicating who they were, and when perhaps they were just trying to deliver what they thought we wanted to hear, or when an adult a college admissions advisor like me had their hands too strongly on this application and the student's true voice, the student's true personality isn't shining through. I say this to my students often. These colleges are looking for teenagers. They're not looking for me to join their freshman class. They're looking for teenagers. So let's be yourself. Let's show off who you are. Let's take that time for self-reflection and be able to communicate that succinctly in the application. This does mean obsessing about fit. So you need to research the school. You need to understand the details about the school, what their personality is, what they're looking for, and then be honest with yourself. A school that may have a wonderful reputation, or that your uncle went to, or that your cousin who you just love and admire went to that college, it may be a fantastic school, but it may not be the fit for you. So trying to force yourself into what you think that college is looking for typically doesn't end with the best result. So it is about understanding who you are, doing your best to understand who the college is, and then looking for that fit. The third bullet point, I think I've already covered, but it's be yourself. Don't try to be what you think they're looking for. That's just going backwards. These college admissions officers are interested in you. They want to know who you are. And if you're not trying to be your genuine self, it's not going to work in the application process. Ticking boxes, it's just, yeah, we want the root, the personal reflection of who they are. Okay, second point was be strategic, not in what you do, but how you present yourself. So I've been asked before, okay, is it better to have my student get a part-time job over the summer or do an academic program at a university? one is not better or worse than the other. It's what does that student want to do, right? What's going to be valuable for them and their growth and their development. But we then do want to be strategic, taking what they have done as to how they are presenting themselves in the application. Admissions officers are people, and people respond to stories. We love hearing a good story. We love storytelling. We want to convey who the student is in a crafted narrative that tells a story about who they are. And then the admissions officer is going to extrapolate that into guessing who they're going to be on that college campus. That's what we want. We want to tell the story that then allows the admissions committee to take it into the future. How will this student contribute to our campus community? That's what they're looking for. So how do you tell a story about yourself? For some people, this comes very naturally, but for others, it can be difficult, particularly for some teenagers who are thinking, well, I don't really know what's special about me. I'm just me. It can often take a college advisor or a parent or someone assisting that student to really see, okay, what is this? What are the things that are distinctive about you? What is the narrative that we can put together to communicate that in the application? So a good challenge is consider how you would convince someone to see a movie, right? Or how are you convinced to see a movie? Little information about plot, little, pieces that maybe stand out or that are exciting. That's storytelling, and that can really suck somebody in and convince them, hey, this student, really knows who they are, and they really could be a great fit for our campus community. So as you're building your personal narrative, I want students to think about how will the admissions officer who reads your application summarize you in one sentence? Because remember, I talked about that note-taking sheet. Admissions officers are reading the applications, taking notes in appropriate places. Typically, there's a summary at the end after they've gone through all of that. Okay, how am I as an admissions officer going to summarize this student, this application into about one sentence? So then future committees, future readers will be able to read that summary and quickly understand who this student is. So it's wonderful to work backwards. What do I want my narrative to be? What do I want my one sentence summary to be? And then we'll go through and make sure all pieces of the application are adding to that narrative, supporting that narrative, that one sentence summary. Okay. So how does each part of the application fit into this story, this narrative that you want to tell? First, all the kind of biographical parts of the application. It's an overview and it covers all the basics, but it is still important. You can tell a lot about a person and the context of who they are and how they've grown up from this part of the application. There are no right or wrong answers here. We want you to be truthful to who you are, who your family is, what your background is, and it's laying the groundwork to build this narrative about yourself. Always be as honest as possible. I've had students, oh, should I answer this question? Should I leave this blank? Well, does it apply to you? Is that something you identify with? Is that something that you feel like is part of who you are? If so, I encourage you to communicate it. But you're not trying to, again, put yourself in a box when you don't even know what they're looking for. The best thing to do is always be honest and provide that information and context. It does help students. It does help readers rather have a context for who you are, how you've grown up, what your family's like. Are you the youngest of 10 siblings? Or are you an only child? These, again, aren't good or bad, right or wrong, but it does give context as to who you are. The academic information part of the overall admissions review is typically the most straightforward. I've had colleagues say before, your scores and your transcript, they're not going to be the thing that gets you into a selective college, but they could be something that keep you out. I do have to state that grades, and the courses that students choose to take within the context of their high school offerings it's a very important part of the admissions review. For a student who is interested in maybe business or engineering or architecture or pre-med, pre-health sciences, or just sciences in general, college admissions officers are paying a lot of attention to their grades and the classes that they're taking, particularly within math and science. They still want to see English, they still want to see social studies, they still want to see world language. But if you're applying as an engineer and maybe you haven't taken calculus yet, or you have taken calculus, but perhaps your grades aren't as strong in those areas, that is something that could potentially inhibit your admission to that university. Most competitive schools do have some type of academic threshold. As long as you're meeting it, then your application, continues on in their committee review process. But again, it's not going to be purely based on academics or a test score that you are admitted. One caveat to that is that some universities do base most of their admissions decisions on a grade and test score kind of like grid or chart. Often these are, maybe regional public universities, and you can tell pretty quickly if that is their formulaic admission strategy by simply visiting their admissions website. So if you go on the admissions website and you see a chart that says freshman requirements, and it's a chart basically with a GPA cutoff, required classes, a GPA cutoff, and a test score chart, that's what I would call a formulaic admission strategy. Those are pretty straightforward. They're pretty predictable, right? If you meet the chart, you'll probably be offered admission. If you don't, you probably won't. But really what I'm talking about here are colleges that practice holistic admissions review. So not just a GPA or test score, but so you all know, there are some colleges that do follow a formulaic review, strictly based on GPA and test score. But again, mostly what we're talking about here, what private universities use, what your more competitive public universities use, is a holistic admissions review. Okay, so in addition to transcript and test scores, they're going above and beyond that in a holistic review. Okay, hopefully that was clear. Another part of the application in a holistic review is the activities list. This really can be one of the most important parts of the application because it's where you communicate who you're going to be on that college campus outside the classroom. How are you going to contribute to, the community, the vibrancy, the student life? What are your interests? Even if they change, that's okay. Maybe you're not going to continue playing the cello when you go to college. That's fine. But it shows who you are. It shows the breadth and the depth of your extracurricular commitments. It's not it is more of a quality over quantity thing. And people are different though. Some people are the type of person who are involved in 20 different clubs and organizations. Other people pick like one or two things and they really focus their time and energy on those things. Both of those are fine. We always used to say that we are building a well-rounded community of individuals. So you be your individual self, who you are. And we, as an admissions office, we're going to build a well-rounded community based on individuals. Admissions officers are practiced at reading between the lines. We can tell pretty easily what activities are really, worthwhile in terms of you invested lots of time and what are maybe you just trying to, fill up a resume or fill up your activities list. So we want to make sure that you are, taking part in activities that really matter to you, that you enjoy, that are contributing to your personal growth and your personal narrative. The activities does shape who you are. Remember that one sentence that I said admissions officers will try to sum up your whole application. Typically in that one sentence, maybe the top one or two extracurricular activities that you list on your application are probably going to show up somewhere in that sentence, whether you're an athlete or a musician, or you're dedicated to service, or you're a leader in student government, whatever it is, that part is going to be highlighted in that narrative of yourself. I often see students who some ways are overly humble about their activities as well. They're like, well, yeah, I do this thing, but it's not that big of a deal. Well, what is it? We want to make sure we're highlighting all the things that you do. This doesn't necessarily just mean clubs and organizations at your school or a sports team or a choir or something like that. This could also be a part-time job. Or maybe you babysit for your younger brother or sister, or maybe you have an elderly family member who lives with you, who you spend a lot of time helping them just with their daily activities and household family responsibilities. All of that goes into your extracurriculars. And we want you to, yeah, just communicate who you are, not in a way though that becomes overwhelming for admissions officers, meaning lists and lists and resumes and resumes. Typically, we don't want you to submit a resume unless the college specifically asks for it. And the reason for this is, again, picture that admissions officer reading 40, 50, 60 applications in one day. Our eyes are trained on exactly how to read the activity section in the application. But suddenly you put a resume up in front of us and everyone's resume has a different format. It has a different order. We're trying to figure out, okay, did she do that in 7th grade or 9th grade? What? Really, colleges, admissions offices care about what you're doing during your high school years. Yeah, maybe you did start playing piano when you were 10, so it's a lifelong activity that you've continued, but we're not really interested in the activities that you just did as a younger student. We're looking at really those high school years. The 150 character limit, that is the description of the activity on the common application. This is something that we can really help students nail that description to accurately capture what they've done, highlight the achievements that they have, and really show their personality within those descriptions. That is definitely an important part of the application. Essays. Essays are also very important, and really, they're the best part. They're the best part of reading an application. An activities list is an activities list, and you can learn a lot about a student there. But the essay is really where your voice, the student's voice, comes through, and they're the best part of reading an application. As you're, scrolling through the PDFs, it's like, okay. Ooh, essay, here we go. So they are very important, but not in the way that most students think. I'm not really, as a reader, looking for like an English paper. I'm not sitting there with like a figurative red pen, like looking for improper use of semicolon or something like that. I want it to be readable. I want your grammar to be good. I want to be able to understand what you're writing, what you're trying to tell me, but I'm not sitting here looking for the thesis statement and, making sure you supported your argument. That's not what this is at all. Instead, this is you, perhaps outrightly, telling your story. I want to be able to read it. I want to be able to read it quickly because, again, I'm going fast here. So therefore, things like paragraph breaks and sentence structure that, is clear is actually vitally important. I've worked with some students who are amazing writers and write these brilliant essays. But if it's structured in just a 600-word paragraph, I'm going to get lost. And I'm going to be lost somewhere, and then potentially, you don't want this to happen, start skimming, right? Because I'm going like, I don't understand what's happening here. When I read essays as an admissions officer, if I had to reread something, that was typically a bad thing, because that meant I was confused. What is she saying here? So you want it to be very readable. Again, if anything, shorter paragraphs, sentences that, have a structure that are easy to interpret. We don't want a research proposal. We don't want to be dazzled, necessarily by, the number of, thesaurus discovered adjectives you can use. I want it to sound like a teenager, a well-spoken teenager, right? A well-written teenager, but it needs to sound like you. And that's very important. And in the essay, it's less about what have you done and more why have you done the things that you chose to do. Okay. I'm mainly talking about the general common application or general personal statement, right? Where it's really open to any topic. Tell me a story. Tell me a story that you're excited about, because if you find this essay interesting, I'm going to find it interesting. If you find this essay boring, there's really no hope that your reader is going to get excited about it. Okay. Remember, admissions officers are, reading maybe 1,000 applications each cycle. We're not going to remember everyone's name, but we will remember a stellar essay. You'll get a little nickname in the admissions office. Oh yeah, that kid, that kid who wrote that amazing essay. I had a kid that I still remember to this day. He wrote about magnets. I'm like, what? Who cares about magnets? He had an amazing story about magnets, and he was magnet kid, like for that entire admission cycle. I don't remember if he got admitted or not, but I remember that. I remember that essay made a huge impression on me. So that's where you want your essay to be memorable and you want your voice to come through. That's when it's going to be powerful. There are also college specific essays, okay, that you may have to write in addition to that general personal statement. These tend to be a more directive prompt. What do you want to do with your future? What are your future? Why do you want to study what you want to study? Tell us about how you're going to contribute to our community here at this university. So we have a more general essay and then perhaps some more college specific essays. There are definitely strategies about how to answer these more directive prompts, but you do want to make sure that they are tailored for that college, because that college specifically wrote that question. They specifically asked that question. They care about your answer to that question. Unlike the general personal statement where I just want to learn something about you, tell me about you. When a college has specifically asked an additional essay question, they really want you to answer that question. So when I'm working with students all the time, we read the question, we read the student's draft, and then we read the question again. Did you answer the question? That is so critically important for those college specific questions. Recommendation letters. Recommendation letters do make a student come alive. This is some adult in the student's life, typically two teachers and maybe a counselor, who talk about that student, who they are in the classroom, who they are in their high school community. Admissions officers know that the student does not have control over the content of that letter, but there are ways to set yourself up for success. Of course, being on time with deadlines. If you ask a teacher to write you a letter of recommendation and it's due in less than 24 hours, they might be tempted not to say the nicest things about you. Now, I'm sure they would decline before they would write a poor letter, but you want to make sure that they are given, plenty of time to craft these letters. They are well aware of your deadlines, and they also should be aware of your narrative, giving them some ideas about, okay, this is what I'm, communicating in my application. Not that you can dictate what they say, but they can probably find examples, right, of times that you've shown that quality or you've demonstrated who you are in their classroom. Pick teachers who know you well. Some people say, well, I'm going to ask my English teacher because English teachers know how to write. The college is not evaluating the quality of the writing in the letter of recommendation. They're trying to find out about the student. So you want to pick a teacher who knows you well. This might be a class where you don't have the highest grade, but maybe you are trying. Maybe you have really shown that teacher your resilience, your curiosity, your desire to learn about this subject that may not come super easily to you. That can show a lot about your character and who you are. So getting to know your teachers well and picking teachers who do know you, maybe even outside the classroom. Perhaps this teacher also advises, a club that you're a member of, or they've seen you grow throughout high school, but have also taught you in that classroom setting. Those can be pretty powerful teachers and community members to ask for letters of recommendation. I say community members, I typically mean, 2 teachers from your junior year and your counselor at school will also write a letter of recommendation. Outside letters of recommendation typically aren't reviewed. There can be cases when they're helpful, but that should be handled on more of a case-by-case basis. So again, you don't overwhelm that reader with 5 or 6 letters of recommendation. I've seen that before. Here's what happens. They become very repetitive. Why? Because you are still that same great person. And then this person thinks so, and then this person thinks so, and then this person thinks so. And at some point I'm like, man, you're slowing me down. Okay. I already have what I need. I understand who the student is. It's not a popularity contest. You want to deliver what they're looking for. Okay. So takeaways. What are you supposed to do with all this information? Admissions officers are real people. They're imperfect. They're real people who hopefully drank enough coffee that day. Okay. They know their school though. They know what they're looking for. They're highly trained and they're good at reading these applications. They can tell really quickly when something isn't ringing true, or, goodness forbid, if a student is trying to, worst case, plagiarize an essay or something's not coming. They have a really good radar for those things. So don't even think about it. Don't even bother. Instead, serve yourself well by being genuine about who you are. Take the time for that self-reflection, and then be strategic about how you communicate. Make sure there is a narrative, that 1-sentence summary that is carried throughout all pieces of your application. That is the best way to really serve yourself well in this admissions office. It should be a statement that you believe in, that really rings true to who you are. And if it doesn't, scrap it and start all over again. Okay. And if need be, if there are any students watching this, sometimes asking an adult to help you, kind of figure out those things that are really remarkable about who you are. It can feel embarrassing, but they can maybe really see those standout qualities of who you are, and then reflect. Is that me? Is that how I see myself? That can lead to that great 1-sentence summary that you want to communicate throughout this process. Okay, I will go ahead and stop my screen share. Okay, I haven't been monitoring the chat. I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
It looks like Sheila has. So
I have, yeah. And that's the first place I'll draw your attention actually as we open up for questions now. Everyone else, feel free to put your question in the chat. You can raise a hand or just come off of mute and ask your question directly. But let's start here. Beth asked a question about a student who is at a highly selective school, and it's a applying to highly selective schools at a very rigorous public high school, and had an injury that led to some lower grades, B's, not terrible grades, but lower than probably she wanted. They're planning to write about this in the additional information section to explain the injury and what she was going through. But Beth's question is, would she be considered not academically admissible? So love to hear your take on that.
Great question, because hopefully I made the point, it's all about context, right? So if there is an abnormal semester or something that disrupted the student's educational experience, like an injury, like an illness, or even, unfortunately, in this world of COVID, a tragic experience with a family member, someone who is ill, that can really affect people, and it affects teenagers especially. And so no, this student is not going to be immediately dismissed as, her B's, she's not as competitive in her high school pool. There's context there, and that's important for admissions officers to notice, and they will notice it. In this case, using the additional information section can be appropriate, but I would also have a conversation with the school counselor who's going to be writing the letter of recommendation, the counselor recommendation, to see if the counselor might feel comfortable addressing that in their letter. The only hesitation I sometimes have about using the additional information section is that the student never wants to feel like they're making excuses, right? Oh, well, this happened and then this happened, and that's why my grades weren't as strong. Sometimes when it's an adult, a counselor who's explaining that situation, it can still communicate the same thing without risking any type of excuse making. So, obviously every high school is different. I don't know if you have a close relationship with the college counselor, the counselor at that school, but it would, I think, merit a meeting so you can talk about it and see, how best to handle it. I think it can be handled either way, but you do want to be thoughtful about it. Obviously you do want to look within context, what types of students, what types of average GPAs is that, college admitting from your high school if you have access to that data. But it's always good to point out those kind of, special circumstances that certainly affected that student's performance. And then I would just say following semesters, I don't know what year we are here, but get those grades up and strong because admissions offices love an upward trend.
Thank you, Allison. We have another question from Angie. My son's school does not offer AP classes and hasn't for over a decade. Will this negatively affect his application? And for additional context, I happen to know Angie very well. Her son is at a very rigorous private school.
Mm-hmm. No, that will not negatively affect your student's application. High schools send along something called a high school profile. They also fill out a school report form with every application that very clearly states what classes they offer. Do they offer honors? Do they offer college prep or accelerated or dual enrollment or AP or IB courses? An admissions office can't expect a student to take a class that wasn't offered. That's unreasonable. They want to know, okay, within what was offered to you at your school, are you taking advantage of the opportunities that are presented there? Okay. So no, that is not going to negatively affect an application by not having AP classes, as long as the student is, taking a rigorous curriculum within the context of their school. Highly selective universities are going to absolutely think that's a rigorous environment.
I'll add a part B to that question.
Yeah.
In the case where students are taking, advanced coursework that might correlate to what is on the AP exam, how are those AP exam scores looked at if the student wasn't in an actual AP class? I know they can register and self-study for a test and take it. Tell us your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so students who, are taking it, as Sheila already said, an advanced class where the content might overlap, at least to some degree. I would certainly encourage that student, yes, to not just take the exam on a whim, really make sure you understand you're prepared for the AP exam, because that type of test preparation may not be happening in your class because it is not a specific AP class. But it can be a good idea if it's a subject that you're strong in, that you want to demonstrate proficiency, absolutely, to take the AP exam. It is optional to report your AP exam scores on the application in most cases. Some universities, particularly in Canada and the UK, where they may require AP exam scores. That's kind of a different situation, but if you do well on that exam, you can certainly report that AP score, and that can show the university that you are kind of, stepping up and maybe going above and beyond. But keep in mind, they're doing it within context. They're not expecting you just to be a test score machine who is taking, 5 AP exams every May, even though you're not enrolled in any AP classes. I think it's a balance, and knowing the student and knowing what subjects that might be appropriate for can be a good idea, but not something that is necessarily required or expected at all.
Excellent. Thank you. We got another question. If a school doesn't supposedly consider demonstrated interest. I love the use of supposedly there. Are
Right.
there ways the student can show interest other than applying early decision? Are there ways to show students strong interest in a particular highly selective school?
Maybe. It depends on the school's policies. If they offer any type of optional interview, I'd want the student to take advantage of that. Some universities I know are moving away from alumni interviews, and some are having optional like video submissions that never would have worked in, the generation when I grew up. What? How would you possibly communicate that? But to students, of this generation, that's easy. They make videos all the time, of course. So it has been kind of fun to help students, brainstorm ways to make their video. What do they want their video to say? How do they want it to, enhance their personal narrative? So yes, even if a school does not track demonstrated interest, or at least doesn't explicitly track it, meaning they're not ticking boxes, did the student visit, did the student, send us an email or anything like that. Potentially doing an interview, or if they have any type of like optional opportunities on the application, simply by showing that you took the time to submit that optional video or something like that, can show that you have a deep, strong interest. I will also say that in those circumstances where they're not tracking interest, there are, depending on the prompt in those college specific questions, there are ways to really show that that school and that you are highly interested in that school. You can sometimes communicate that very effectively through even the required college specific essay questions there.
That's a really good point, Allison. And I'll also point out kind of the elephant in the room with this question. Highly selective schools are often not tracking demonstrated interest because they're confident that everybody will go. Harvard and Princeton don't need to worry, are you interested in coming? They're pretty sure that if they give you an offer of admission, you're going to come, right? So that's sort of one of the reasons they don't care about it. For other schools, that sort of demonstrated interest, or if you've traveled to the college to take an official tour, if you've communicated with the admissions office, even the rate at which you open their emails can actually be a really good predictor of whether a student will attend if accepted. And there's a long backstory to this, but essentially a lot of colleges want to manage their yield. What percentage of students accept their offer to come? And the higher their yield, the more, the higher their rankings go in the US News and World Report, their actual debt rating goes up. It has all sorts of weird effects that you think it should not matter in college admissions, but they end up mattering to the business of the college quite a bit. And so they want their yield to be as high as possible, and that's where demonstrated interest can really come into play. We have two really good questions next. One I think I can answer for you guys as the test prep expert on the team. Leah asked, do some schools prefer SAT over ACT or vice versa? Additionally, do Ivy Leagues accept ACT super scores? So I can make a blanket statement. Colleges do not care. Four-year colleges in the United States do not care whether a student submits an SAT over an ACT score, or the other way around. There used to be regional preferences. Those have all been erased. And in fact, the ACT has become the more popular test for students to take and submit with their applications, more popular than the SAT for several years now. And with there's a looming redesign of the SAT. We'll see how those numbers sort of shake out. Colleges have an official concordance that they can use to translate between types of scores. So it's in your students' best interest to figure out which test they can score the best on if they are going to pursue a testing route, because that's another question, and focus on that test alone. Now, the question of super score is a really interesting one. So super score means if your student has taken the test more than once, a super score would be the highest section scores from each of those tests combined as if your student took it in one sitting and got all those great scores. Right? It is standard practice for colleges to super score the SAT, though there are some colleges that still do not do that. It is becoming standard practice for colleges to superscore the ACT, though there are many more colleges that don't do that. And in fact, some colleges superscore the excuse me, I'm getting all tongue-tied, superscore the SAT, but do not superscore the ACT, which seems very unfair to me. So you really do need to look at the testing policy for each individual school and make sure you're meeting their requirements. That's the best way to go about that. All right, back to Allison now. If a school does offer AP classes, would an admissions officer count the number of AP classes that an applicant has taken versus the number that the school offers? So like what percentage of these AP classes did they take advantage of? Does that matter, the number of APs?
Well, maybe to some degree. They are typically going to count, okay, the number that the student took. And they may compare that with the number of AP exams offered, but I hesitate to say that they're going to directly compare those two numbers, because a lot of those AP exams are in different languages, right? I can't expect the student to have taken AP French and AP Spanish and AP Italian and AP Latin, and it's unreasonable. So I'm not trying to ever suggest that they're trying to see, oh, did they take all the APs offered or close to it? Okay, that's just not possible typically in the 4 years. And most, I don't know if I can say most, but many high schools don't even allow students to take AP classes until junior or senior year. There are certainly exceptions to that. But what they might do to compare, just to be fair, is to say, okay, within the applicant pool from this high school. So there are certain high schools that are large in size who, for some reason, a particular college is extremely popular, right? And they're going to get 30, 40, 50, applications from this one particular high school. They may compare like, okay, this student elected to take 6 AP classes and this student only elected to take 1 or 2. That could be somewhat compared, okay, in terms of what rigor that student is choosing to take on. If the school offers 30 AP classes and you've only taken 1, maybe that's not the most demanding curriculum within that pool. But if they offer 30 AP courses, we can't expect you to have taken 28 of them. That's not reasonable. So it's more just about, they're not looking for you to have taken a high percentage of what's offered. I guess if there's only 2 AP classes offered at your school, then maybe they would like to see that you've taken both of them. But this is all within context. So just suffice to say that the college admissions reader is going to know the context and look at that within proper context based upon the high school, because it is very different, vastly different at different high schools.
That's great. I'll answer Dana's question in the chat. Hamza asked a question about transferring. If transferring from a less competitive high school to a more competitive high school, will admissions officers view the application in context of just the graduating school, or do they take both high schools into account? How does that work?
Great question. I mean, typically they're going to take both into account, because they're going to look at, all 4 years of the high school experience. So that may actually translate into 2 transcripts. So they may have a transcript for 9th and 10th grade from one school, and then the 11th grade leading to the 12th grade, transcript from the current school. So it all has to be taken within context. And, that's where directly comparing GPAs just never works, right? Because that student particularly, only has maybe 1 or 2 semesters of a GPA from their current high school, and the rest of it is at a different high school. So this is why colleges pay real people to read these applications, because this is, again, context, something that you can't just capture with a number or a GPA. So no, they're going to take into account both. The current high school is probably going to be the one who sends both transcripts, because they're going to have a copy of the transcript from the previous high school. So it's probably all going to get sent at once. But if you ever have any, questions or concerns, you can certainly talk to the current counselor to say, is it obvious that this is 2 different schools in the materials that are being sent? But the admissions officer is going to pick up on it anyway in the biographical part of the application, because you're going to list all the schools that you attended. So they're going to clearly understand that there was a transition there. Yeah.
Great. All right. So we got a bunch of other questions coming in. How do admissions offices take COVID into account in terms of evaluating, lack of extracurriculars or lack of opportunities or effects on grades due to virtual learning? It's a really good question.
That's a very good question. And again, context, oh my gosh, it's like my word today. um, high schools in their high school profile, in the high school report form that they send to colleges, do communicate any policies, right, that were implemented during COVID. Maybe instead of giving semester and final grades, they just gave final grades that year, or maybe everything for that semester was pass fail. They are going to communicate, if they had changes in grading policy, changes in credit policy, anything like that. Many high schools will also do their best to communicate, if there were also major implications just in the school community. Were they online exclusively for a long time, or did they have half their student population attending at a different time in a weird schedule? So COVID is something that it dramatically affected our students' experiences, and in some ways negatively. And that's really difficult, and it's difficult for families, and it's difficult for the student. Please know that the colleges understand this. They understand that you probably weren't going to be getting this internship or doing this job because that company wasn't going to hire a high school student to come in and do it during COVID when they were, already under a lot of restrictions. So just know, as much as that may be worrying you, colleges understand. They don't want excuses, right? They don't want to say, oh, well, why I got straight D's that semester was because of COVID. Okay, we're looking for, what did you gain from it? How did you overcome these challenges? But they understand that the challenge is real. So if there are specific things that
for 6:20.
If there are specific things that you want to make sure that are highlighted in the application that directly affected the student, whether that be academically or extracurricularly, have a conversation with the counselor at your school to see how to best communicate that. And colleges are certainly understanding.
Great. I'm doing my best to field all these test prep questions for you. Okay, we did that one. Oh, how does an admissions office assess the rigor of a curriculum?
Rigor of a curriculum. Good question. It is a judgment typically that an admissions officer will be asked to make at some point in their review process. How rigorous is this curriculum within the context of the high school? Some of that information they glean from the high school profile, the information provided by the high school in the school report form. And some of it's also just being well trained and knowing the high schools that they're reading for. If there's a high school that I've never encountered before, if that, that certainly would happen. Maybe it's a, school that just hadn't sent us applications before. Maybe it was a new school or something like that. The admissions officer is going to take some time to really dive in and try to understand, okay, what is the rigor of this curriculum? If need be, even calling the counselor and saying, hi, I work at this university. I'm trying to learn more about your curriculum. They may ask a few questions if perhaps the subject matter of the class isn't obvious from the title. This tends to happen when high schools get really creative with their course names. And it's like, is this trigonometry? I don't know. It's now Foundations 3. Typically, if a high school is going to do that, they will give some type of course description in their information. But if there's ever a concern, the admissions officer does feel empowered to, make a phone call or reach out to learn more, which is great. So yeah, a lot of it is judgment. They're real people making judgment calls, and there could be a slight numeric counting, okay, how many APs or honors classes, things like that. One thing I will stress is to enhance, the rigor of your curriculum is keep in mind the 5 core academic areas that colleges are going to zoom in on: English, math, science, social studies, history, world languages. Okay. So dropping, a world language after sophomore year, not always a great idea if you're aiming for the more competitive universities. So, You want to just make sure that you're covered in all those different academic areas, just as a baseline rigor.
We have one last question that might be great to answer under the wire. Do colleges have quotas of a number of students from a particular high school or a geographic region?
They do not. Okay, they do not. No one has a rule that you can only take 5 kids from this, high school each year or something like that. I will say though that colleges may have geographic diversity goals, right? Depending on where they're located, depending on what their administration deems to be important, they may be saying, hey, we'd love to increase our enrollment from the West Coast this year. So they may give that directive to the admissions office. Hey, see if you can scoop up some more, Pacific Northwest, California kids. And if you live in South Carolina, that may not work in your favor, but it's something that's completely outside of your control. And it's just an institutional priority that you're probably never going to know about, but it is something that the university admissions office may be functioning with. Now, that is not a quota. That is not something where they hit a limit and that's it. You're never going to be, considered because they've already taken their, set limit from a certain high school or from a certain region. So that's not the case. No quotas, but I will say that the admissions offices at the higher levels, they are trying to do that broad angle lens and say, what is our incoming class going to look like? Is it balanced in all the ways that we want it to be balanced? And that could be a different priority year to year. But no quotas, no limits, nothing like that.
All right, great. Well, with that, we are at time. Alison, thank you so much. Anyone else who has a question that we didn't get to, you can always email me directly. I will either, get Alison to answer your question, or I'll answer it myself, or we'll find a way to get you the answer you need. So feel free to email me. You can also email our main office at info@signeteducation.com or give us a call. Where we always do a free consultation with anyone who is interested in what we have to offer. So take advantage of that. You'll get to talk to me or to Alison, maybe, depending on your question. Thank you again for your time tonight. If you found this event on LinkedIn, I just want to make sure that you did register, because that way you will get the recording. This is it's kind of a crazy looking link, but that's the registration link. So please make sure you registered, and then you'll get a recording and a nice follow-up email. With that, we'll say good evening. Thank you again for your time and hope to see you at the next one.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.